Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our training program this morning. My name is Bob George. I'm the Director of Employer Info Systems, used to be the Director of Employer Services. On behalf of the board and our Executive Director, I want to welcome you this morning. We're going to go through our agenda for the day. We're going to go through the training program itself. I'm excited about this one. This is the second to last one, so we'll get started here. Just in case anyone didn't see, both in the reminder email that we sent to everybody, there's some links to both the deduction reporting checklist that we're going to talk about today, as well as the slides for today's presentation. And those slides and checklist are available, links that are in the chat for this program right now. So if you go into the chat feature, you can download them from there if you don't have them in your email, or if you're not sure where the email is. Either place, you should be able to get to them pretty quickly. I'd recommend printing out the slides if you'd like to take notes on them. Sometimes that can be helpful. And then with that, we'll get started. So today's program, we're going to be covering the first half of deduction reporting. So we've been building up to this. This is like think of it as like a 6-part program. We introduced you to the MTRS and gave you lots of little topics. We talked about membership eligibility, what earnings are eligible. We talked about creditable service and how that works. And so that's really going to plug into deduction reporting as well. So today's going to be the first part of deduction reporting. Now, we broke deduction reporting up into 2 pieces. We talked about like the overall view and the requirements and importing a file. And then the actual dealing of a file and submitting it to pending, we made that its own program. And the reason we did that is for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't want it to be too long. B, it gives you a little bit of a break for me in between. And it also allows for some of our employers to break this process sort of in half. They might have one party who loads the file, and then they have another party who submits the file. So for those who are just loaders, you can go to this program, and then if you sort of hand the baton off to one of your teammates, they'll be able to attend next week. All right. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about the reporting deadlines and requirements. We're going to talk about the file layout. We're going to talk about importing your file. We're going to talk about the first and second level errors, fixing your import if there are errors present, and then we're going to do a demo of that stuff, right? Because it's one thing to talk about it, let's show it. Unlike some of the other sections, registration, watching me key in someone's name, there's nothing good about that. But here we're going to show you a couple files. I'm going to show you a known issue with files. We're going to import some in just so you can see what it looks like. We'll import a clean one. We'll import one with some errors, and we'll go ahead and fix it. Okay, so with that, we have been doing a training program all summer long, so I just want to touch on this list. And as you can see, as I mentioned, we had the introduction, membership eligibility, and particularly for those of you watching on video, just so you know, so this is the second to last one. So in theory, this should be the 5th video you're watching, and you do want to do them in order so that they kind of make sense. There was a method to the madness. And so today's session is going to be the monthly reporting overview, importing and fixing your import errors. All right. So with that, let's get started. So statutory monthly reporting deadline. Now this deadline, we talk about all the time. On the 10th of the month, the reports and payment for the previous month are legally due. Now this is very specifically written into the statute. I gave the exact language from the statute dictating that those reports, and when we say the report should be here, we don't mean like a clunker that kind of looks like the shell of a report. So that report should be here, it should balance, it should have all the errors and exceptions fixed. Now we know that not all folks are there right now. We do have districts that are in this position right now. We have districts that have had their deduction reports released through July 2024. So, and August obviously hasn't fully happened yet, so that's about as good as you can get. Having said that, we do have some folks in all different stages, especially coming out of COVID and everything. We know that there was some backlogs and stuff, so this is something we want to get everyone back to and remind them, like, this is what the law says. We got to get those files to us, but most importantly, those files, when they get to us, they really have to be good enough. Otherwise, it's kind of wasted effort. So now in the statute, it sets the deadline, but it also prepares a penalty. And basically the MTRS is empowered to request compliance assistance from the Superior Court. And so I just want to bring this up. I mean, this is like last resort for us. This is not what we want to do. But in Chapter 32, subsection 18I, we do have the legal authority to petition the courts to enforce the deadlines and to make school districts come to compliance. Now, somewhere between there, we'll reach out to, of course, to the schools first, the business managers next, superintendent, possibly DESE if things are really bad. But I do want you to know, I mean, there is this capability where we can go to the courts and have the courts enforce penalties or force a school district to comply with the law. Now, in addition to what's in the statute, the MTRS as a state agency has the power to pass some regulations. And those of you who've gone through multiple videos, you've seen a few of these. We have one on membership eligibility. We have one on regular compensation. So this is our regulation on monthly reporting. Okay, and it sets up a couple of things that I think you'll see a routine and exactly sort of how we go about our business, right? So each district is required to send in one report. That's consistent both within the statute and the regulation. You can send multiple payments if you'd like to. The statute does allow for it, so we allow for it. But there has to be exactly one report per employer per month. Okay, that report has to be electronic, and it has to be submitted to us via MyTRS. Now, if you are an employer with 50 or less members, there is a very rarely granted waiver where we might be able to help you with some of your electronic reporting. I think at this point, it's only applied to one employer in all of the Commonwealth because they only have 8 members. So it doesn't mean you don't have to report electronically, but we sort of help that district along a little bit with the initial compiling of their report. That employer still has to submit their payment every month. They still have to, submit their deduction report to us, but it is something done on a monthly basis. Okay, so those are the laws that set up the deduction reporting and the deadline for each month. Now, some key requirements coming out of this. Deduction reports must be submitted electronically. There are no paper reports. Payments can be submitted via EFT, which we're going to talk about next week, or you can send a paper check. Okay, if you send a paper check, there's a form. I'm going to show you what it looks like in just a minute. And you want to make sure you're sending those payments directly to the lockbox. You do not want to send them to our main office. It says it right on the form, so I'm going to show you that in a sec. But think of that as your deposit form that goes with the checks. When you're sending it, if you're sending it a paper check and you're sending a submittal form, do not send anything else with it. Anything else you send with it, hopefully not precious documents, because they're going to get shredded. So it specifically tells you not to send anything with it, with the checks, and it says it right on the form. So now, something that in a lot of ways seems like it should be kind of common sense, but your monthly deduction report must match the payment. Right. So now you can have multiple payments, and obviously we mean the sum of those payments, but it's, you're collecting money from employees. There's no employer match here, so there should not be any fuzzy math. You're taking deductions from people's accounts. You should be able to add them all up and send us a check for them. It's really relatively simple. You should have control reports that you're using from your payroll software. Do not just look at your MTRS report and write a check. Make sure you're following control reports that verify the exact amount you withdrew from people's accounts, because you don't want to be misled and somehow miss a reporting situation, and then you've missed your opportunity for checks and balances to make sure that if your report is off, it's being justified by the check. Again, you can make multiple payments if you'd like. It's just that there has to be one report per month per statute and regulation. And then last but not least, I know we talked about the penalties a little bit here. We talked about the requirements and trying to make it super clear to everybody. But please know, we want to work with employers. We don't want to work against you. So we're always more interested in helping you succeed than, say, reporting you to DESE or reporting you to the courts or any of that kind of stuff. We want you to do well. We want to work with you. We pride ourselves on our relationships with our school districts, and we want to make those things work. And our ultimate goal is quite simple. We want to provide a benefit to your employees that they earned. And I think you want that too. So let's all work together and we should be able to get there. So what I want to show next is actually the deduction submittal form. So this is the one-page form that you send every month. And as you can see, it's really set up to be sort of like a deposit slip, right? So you're going to have your agency number, which is your 4-digit MTRS district code, your district's name, or your employer's name, the payroll month and year, because if you're sending in a check, we need to know what month it's for, and then multiple spots for you to enter check numbers, the date, regular deduction breakdown, 2% breakdown, installments if there's any, and then the totals. If you, for some reason, generate more than 4 checks, you can do 2 forms, no big deal. you'll see underneath that we don't really have a comment section anymore because, again, all reporting should happen in MyTRS. But you will see that we please ask you not to attach any documentation. Now, below there is contact information so that you can be contacted. For instance, if your check goes astray and somehow ends up at, I don't know, University of Pennsylvania or something, because you'll see our lockbox is in Pennsylvania. And so please make sure you're filling that out. And then as you can see, there's a PO box down the bottom. Now that is a lockbox at our bank. And so their sole purpose is to take funds in, they cash them for deduction reports, and then they send us the funds. So again, please don't send them anything else. No paper reports, no copies of stuff. We don't want copies of extra checks and voids. That's why we have MyTRS. And we're going to walk you through MyTRS, but everything should be reported in MyTRS, not through this vehicle. This is quite frankly just you sending us a check. Now, the next form I'd like to quickly touch on is the deduction reporting checklist. So this page, we're showing it to you. We gave you a link. We sent it in the reminder. We also give you a link in today's chat. This checklist is designed to walk an employer through the reporting process, right? So, you check off that you made a payment. Now, it might not be you. Maybe it's one of your coworkers or something, but you import and process your import. You resolve your errors and exceptions. You make sure you deduct your report balances. And you can see it walks you all through all the different steps to consider as an employer to make sure you've taken all the steps you need to have a good submitted payroll. Now, we're going to talk about this a little bit next week as well. But one thing that we're seeing is a trend, and you'll see the two arrows that I've drawn in here. Those two arrows are conspicuously pointing on the fact that your report and your payment really need to match. We're having an interesting sort of dilemma with this recently, or an uptick in employers like, oh yeah, I took care of all my errors, it looks great, and then we open it up and we're like, okay, first thing, it doesn't add up. And sometimes it's off by a little bit, other times it's off by a lot, but it has to match to the penny. You are taking deductions from other people's pay. There's no good reason why it doesn't match. Now, let's say you have a deduction report, you know exactly why it's off. You looked at everything, you said, oh my God, I wrote the check wrong. I know exactly what happened. I had a district once, and they included their local retirement board money with their MTRS check. They didn't realize it until they mailed everything. So they overpaid us by like $35,000. It was a very specific number, and they knew exactly why they did it. They could provide reports to prove it. They just messed up, and when they cut their check, they cut it wrong. Okay, so provide us that proof. Provide us a good lengthy comment on the deduction report, and obviously the only real remedy for that is to take a credit on a future report. But if you're going through and you're like, I looked really hard and I just don't know why we're off $1,200, that's not sufficient. We need to work with you with control reports or some other vehicle that's available to you through your payroll management system to make sure we can figure out why your reports are off. Because frankly, it's really simple. You took a bunch of money, you report a bunch of money, and it has to add up. So please keep that in mind, that in the beginning of your process and at the end of your process, there's a reason it's on the checklist twice. Please make sure you are checking to make sure your report's balanced. So otherwise, we're going to send them back because there's really not a whole lot we can do. Now, we might help you try and find it if you're really struggling with it or something along those lines, but it's pretty simple accounting. Your report has to match up to its corresponding payment. Okay, so this is the reporting checklist. I'm encouraging folks. I hope you use it. If you don't find this one, or if you can download a copy again from the links we have, it's also the last page in your deduction manual. If for some reason you can't print, but you want to copy it from there, you can do that too. It's always available to you there. All right. So next we're going to talk about the file layout. But before we do, Scott, do we have anything in the chat?
Nope, nothing yet.
Perfect. Okay. So let's talk about the file layout a little bit. So the file that you produce, first, the actual structure to it. If for some reason you need this, maybe you have a new payroll vendor that's coming up, or maybe somebody on this call is a payroll vendor and they're just trying to get in the game. The full file layout is available on our website. If you were going down the different tabs on the employer page, we list it last because folks that are established don't really need access to it very often. And so for that reason, you're going to see that if you click on MTRS monthly report layout, it explains every single field, what's technically required. Here, I just showed you one field, which is the record type. It's a required field. It's one character. For payroll records, it should be identified as a C, and it just gives a little bit of a description. We do that for every single file, or every single field in the file layout. Now, when you're popping out a deduction report, if you were popping out from your payroll system, that's generally how people create them. you'll see that it looks a little bit like the picture at the bottom of the screen. Obviously, this is a fake one. And so if you were looking at the file layout itself, a couple things to know. So first, it's generally a text file, right? It's a text file. It's created from your payroll software. And again, there's a full file layout online if for some reason someone needs that. But most of the payroll that everybody's using, or the payroll software packages people are using, this is already developed. It's not something you have to develop. If you're going to a payroll software package for the first time, or you're switching or whatever, and they're an established payroll software package, you should not have to build this. This is a thing that's already built into their system. Sometimes you have to configure it a little bit, put in your pay codes, if you will, and make it yours. But aside from that, there really shouldn't be a lot when you're transitioning to a new payroll software. Now, the other thing, and to help make this the truth, when MyTRS was implemented in 2010, the MTRS used the same primary layout that was introduced in 1996. So we are literally using a file layout that was originally written for a language called COBOL from 1996, because we were trying to make the transition to MyTRS as seamless as possible. So again, you can see it's a really basic file. Any payroll system should be able to generate it. Now, the import file itself, I know that the structure probably looked a little bit like gobbledygook, but there's some categories of data that are in there. And none of these should probably surprise you, right? We're going to have some demographic data. So for all your employees that you're reporting to us, you can give us their SSN, you can give us their name, their mailing address. By the way, this is a great reason why we always tell you never, ever, ever email these files, because there is so much data in them. Sending them through MyTRS is encrypted and that's safe, but email's not. Okay, so there are 3 data categories. Again, you get demographic. Now we're talking about contractual data. So this is like somebody's full year, full-time salary, their full-time, part-time percentage, their pay schedule. So like their pay frequency, which is how often you pay them, their pay duration, which is how long that's going to take, or their contract term, which is the number of months they work. And then you have earnings and deductions. So you have all the different earnings categories as well as the deduction categories. Okay, so it's relatively simple setup. You got anyone who's working in MyTRS or looked at deduction reports, should be no surprise. That's where we get the data. What you will notice is that when we go from imports to deduction reports, or the deduction report editor, the addresses exit. So we don't carry those over into the deduction report editor, because if you've gone to initial, we've already accepted them from you. Okay. Now, to import a file, and I'm going to show you what this looks like, but I just want to talk about it for a little, for a minute here on a slide, which is you go to import history, you're going to choose upload. There's going to be a wizard that opens. You're going to browse to your file. You're going to specify a name. You're going to designate what report, what time period it's for. You're going to click next. You're going to review. You're going to click confirm. Okay, so as you can see, this is a pretty straightforward process as far as doing the initial upload. All right. Now, at the initial upload, we look for some pretty rudimentary, possible errors here, right? So we call them the first level errors, mostly because we didn't have a better name. So the first level errors are detected on attempt to submit your attached file, right? So you attach a file, you're going to send it to us, and it starts looking for some pretty basic stuff. You can't load the file if it's not a .txt file. It's the wrong format. So we stop you there, okay? If the record doesn't have the right number of characters, well, the data is going to be all screwy if it's not in the right layout. So we're going to stop you there. If it's not the right employer, some of you have access to more than one employer. So if you accidentally, you're working on employer A, but accidentally click on the file for employer B, we're not going to let it even try going further. We're just going to say wrong people, okay? If it doesn't match the report. So again, if you're trying to load April into March, we're not going to give you much more sophisticated levels there later. We're just going to say, hey, that's not the right report. Same thing if you have a pay date that's invalid. And then the commas thing. Again, we used a 1996 file layout, so the name is only in one field. So it's last name, comma, first name. So if there is no comma there, we can't separate the last and first name, we're not going to accept your file. If there are 2 commas in the name field, we're also going to block that because we don't know what to do with the third part, okay? So just an example. Now, people don't run into these very often at all. At least they don't complain if they do. This is almost always going to be, oops, I clicked on the wrong file. Let me go grab the right file. So it's very helpful, and it's immediately, you get immediate feedback if you do something wrong here, okay? Now, once your file is imported, it has to be processed really to move to the next level, right? And it's going to have a status of not processed because they haven't done anything with it yet, and a process flag of ready. All right. Now those process flags are going to change a little bit. If you're in the middle of processing something, it's going to say, all right, I'm attempting to do that. So it's going to kind of give you some feedback as to the status of your file at any given point. So if it's in the middle of thinking about your file, it's going to tell you that. All right. So if you click on into the import, so once you have them loaded, you're going to click on the ID number. Again, I'm going to demonstrate this in a minute, but I just wanted to kind of walk you through sort of mentally before we get there. All right. You're going to hit process in the top right-hand corner. And when you do, you're going to get this little green indicator, and it's going to say your file's been queued for processing. All right. Now, one thing I can't say enough is imports take a few minutes to process. And a lot of times there's like a 2-day window where everyone in the state tries to load their files. So if you do it on that day or one of those 2 days, it tends to be a traffic jam. It's kind of like everyone going home at 5 o'clock, right? Somehow we haven't figured out a better process as humans. So with importing, if you get caught in traffic, what I would say is you have a couple of options. If you have other things you can do in MyTRS, there are a lot of school districts that still have files to work on. You can always import your current file and then go work on another deduction report that you still have to submit to us, okay? If you are in another screen in MyTRS and you have MyTRS open and you're doing stuff and that file finishes processing, a little green confirmation message will appear on any screen you are on MyTRS. So if you're importing and you're like, all right, I want to make sure my import goes okay, but I'm going to go over here and work on my other deduction report, you can do that. And while you're working on your other deduction report, it'll pop up like toast. It appears and it says, okay, your import's done. So then you can save what you're doing and go back to imports if you want, or just go back there whenever you're done doing the thing that you're working on at that point, okay? The other option, of course, is you can always go in, load it, hit process, and just come back a couple hours later and see how it turned out, right? That's always an option. I know a couple of school districts have had a lot of success with, they're going to work on the deduction reports in the afternoon. So first step they do, of course, is to load their most current deduction report for the month. So they load it, they hit process, and then they just kind of like do other work. And then when they sign in the afternoon, they check on the import, and then they go work on their deduction reports. And I've heard a few people say that they found that to be the best way to go about it. Now, if it's successful, the import status process flag will be changed to process successfully. You'll also see that we have some statuses like process with errors, validate with errors. We'll show you a little bit of that when we're actually in the demo. Now, once you have the file loaded and you're in a process status, right? You might get a process status of like process with errors, okay? And that's when we're applying second level errors. So there are 3 total levels. First level, real basic, you attach the wrong file basically. Second level is going to be sort of the intermediate, right? They're not as sophisticated as the more complicated data errors you're going to look at. What we're really looking for here is some basic stuff. We want to make sure the file looks like it's intact. We want to make sure there are numbers and number fields. Everybody on the report has to be a registered MTRS member to be reported in MyTRS, right? So it might be flagging somebody saying, hey, this member is not registered for membership, all right? So if we're getting something along those lines, those need to be resolved. Now, payroll system maintenance is the key to avoiding these kinds of errors, right? I can tell you that there are school districts that run their reports every single month, and they like never run into this because they're always maintaining their payroll software up front. To be honest, I have a couple of users, and they hadn't run into a second level error in a couple of years, and then they did, and they were like, I got to be honest, it's been so long since I fixed one, I forget how to do it. So they'll reach out and they're like, all right, I know I have to fix this one person. I don't remember how I'm supposed to do it. So we're going to talk about that. I'll show you one. We'll fix a couple things. And just like in when you're working on deduction reports, in the editor, like when they're initial, you can make corrections to your file, okay? But some of the common second level errors, this is stuff that generally is like brand new people being added, or maybe it's somebody who is already in your payroll system and they're switching from being like an aide to a teacher, stuff like that. And so did the person not get registered for membership? Did you accidentally register the wrong social security number? So MyTRS, still isn't seeing them because the SSN was wrong, so it's not finding them. We see contract term is invalid, pay frequency is invalid, FTE percentage is invalid. These are kind of the fields that in a lot of payroll systems sort of populate in the same place. There are multiple payroll packages that store all of this in one field in MyTRS, excuse me, in the payroll system, and therefore they're not feeding through how you'd expect them to when you're creating your deduction reports, right? So now if you ever pull a report, I had a school district and they were looking at their files and they said, okay, I have no idea what happened. We just did an upgrade to our payroll system and no earnings are showing up. So I have an earnings error for like 1,200 people. You always have the opportunity to decide to just void it. Okay, so you can either fix it or void it. It's always whatever you think is going to be, the least path of resistance. Okay, so when we're talking about fixing the errors, I'm going to move to the next slide actually for this. So just like when you're in initial status, again, you can go in, you can actually make changes. We're going to go change a file in just a couple slides. Okay, now you always have the choice of whether or not you want to fix a file or void it. So if you have like 2 errors, gosh, just fix that file, right? But if you pull up a report and there's some kind of systemic thing where you have no idea why, but all the salaries are blank, or there must have been some sort of a mistake updating a table for the new school year, things like that can happen, right? If it's easier to just void your file and recreate a new one, absolutely. Again, we want you to get to the promised land in the least amount of work possible. So if avoiding and replacing it is the right way to go, please do so. Please keep in mind, depending on how old that file is, recreating it and how many errors are on it, recreating it could lead you down a path of like a newer replaced file might have more errors in it. If, for instance, it's for early 2002 and you're trying to recreate it in 2024 and now all your 2024 contract data is going to be on it. There could be situations where you might be better off fixing it. Okay, so but having said that, it's always your choice. And if you're staying on top of your imports every month, even if you haven't submitted all your files, if you're staying on top of your imports, you're always going to be in the best position possible because you're going to be pulling data in real time and hopefully run into fewer salary issues caused by creating files out of in the wrong school year or something like that. All right. Now, if you have a file and you've processed it and you get a bunch of process with errors, you may have to validate it first because only statuses that begin with the word validated can be voided. Okay. It's sort of a protection so somebody doesn't try to void a file they already pushed through the system. So that's a system limitation. There's nothing you can do about it. It's like an extra step. It kind of can be a pain in the neck. I'm going to demonstrate that for you. But again, overall, usually not that big a deal. All right. And then last but not least, successfully imported files can still be deleted when they're initial, right? So let's say you import a file, everything went through great. You get to the deduction report editor and you say, oh my God, I have a $200,000 variance because only one of my 2 pay dates were on it. I didn't notice that when I was importing it. No big deal. You can always still delete the file when you're in the deduction report editor and then go back to imports and import a better or cleaner file, okay? So that's always going to be an option for you when they're initial. All right. Before I get into sort of what MyTRS is and we start moving towards the demo, Scott, have we got anything in the chat?
Nothing yet.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about what MyTRS is. So MyTRS is an online reporting tool introduced in July 2010. I'm sure a lot of the folks that are watching this are already aware of that. So here's a screenshot from the Blackboard Public Schools. You can see in this screenshot, there's an overall view. On the far left-hand side, you have all your different functions in blue that you can access through MyTRS. In the middle, you have an I would like to menu. And in here, this is kind of a shortcut to a lot of processes. So if you want to import a file, you can go to import history and access it that way. Or you can just choose import a deduction file, and it automatically brings you to import history and starts your import process. Okay, so think of it as just it like saves you a click. Something that I think is underrated, if you look to the far right side, is the news section. So we try to put out bulletin information here. The most important bit of information we give you every month is the deadline for deduction reporting. So every month, for retiree insurance deduction reporting. So every month, we have a cutoff for the retiree payroll. So everybody who might wear 2 hats, you work on deduction reports, you might also work on retiree insurance. That deadline is important. That deadline is important to everybody, though, because we're also going to tell you that for 2 to 3 days every month, you're going to lose access to MyTRS. And so it tells you what those 2 days are so you can process ahead of time. So in this month, August 2024, on Friday, August 16th at 9 p.m. through Wednesday, August 21st, you're not going to be able to get into MyTRS. Now, that's only 3 business days. right? And that's so that we block employer access so we can check all the things employers did before we process our retiree payroll. And then of course we process our retiree payroll. You know, the purpose and the reason why we're all here is to pay retirees, of course. And then we restore access to everybody. All right. So it's just important to know, even if you don't work on retiree insurance, that you know that deadline, because you're not going to be able to work on your reports those days. Okay, so now before we get to our demo, one last screenshot. I wanted to show you this with arrows. Now, this is the import history screen. On the import history screen on the far left, you have ID numbers. That's how you're going to get into your actual file. And then you're going to see the two status flags that I was mentioning before, the status and then the process flag. So if you have a file and it first loads up, you'll see the top example here was not processed and the process flag is ready. Below it, you can see a voided file that's completely voided, so that's why the process flag is completed. And then we have a different one saying process with errors, and you'll see that that status matches on both sides. Now, if we were to click one of these, if we hit process, you'll see the status will change to queued for processing, okay? And then the process flag will say either complete, depending on when it completes, or while it's in process, it'll say in process or something along those lines. Okay. So again, MyTRS is letting you know what it's up to while it's processing what you're looking for. All right. All right. So now we're going to go to a demo. Then we're going to go off the rails a little bit. And we're going to go into MyTRS from the outside. So first, whenever I like to go to MyTRS, I personally just always like to, choose like an incognito window so I don't have any issues going on with cookies or any of that kind of stuff. So if you're in, say, Google Chrome, if you hit Control Shift N, you get a nice new window that can pop up. Now, you may or may not have different links saved. I always like to have my MyTRS link saved there. So your MTRS link should hopefully bring you to the employer page. That way, as an employer, you have everything you need, training materials, all that kind of stuff. And then in the far left-hand corner, you have the MyTRS employer sign-in. We're going to click on that. Today, we're going to be Andrea admin. A score. And as I'm sure you guys are all aware, we're going to go into two-factor authentication for security purposes. Good stuff. Now, if you go in incognito, or if you go in private session, which is the Edge version of incognito, it's going to require that code every time. Otherwise, if you're just going in through Chrome or Edge, if it's picking up that you're in the same IP address you were last time you accessed MyTRS, it won't ask you for that. Okay, it will periodically, but it's not all the time. If you're in incognito, though, again, it's going to ask you every time. Okay, but I prefer that. So here we are on the homepage. Again, we have our I would like to links that I mentioned before. We have our news. So we're going to go ahead and import a deduction report. Now, before we do our import, I'm just going to shrink these down a little bit. And I have a file with our presentation and some files to look at, right? So I just want to show you what a clean file looks like. So we talked about this. I showed you a little bit. Now, my personal browser at home, it's got the dark settings on, so it's the black and white contrast. Sorry about that. And I have a newer version of the text file, so it's going to wrap them, okay? But if you were looking this up on your notepad, you might have a white with black text, and you may only have one line per record, okay? But this is what the MTRS file layout looks like in a text editor, all right? Now, one of the things that we've run into recently, and we've gotten some complaints from school districts, is they may have a file issue where it's saying that you have files that don't have enough characters, right? But you're looking at your file and you're like, well, I don't know if this looks good, but I think it looks pretty good. So if you scroll down to the bottom of your text file, what you want to really look for is, do you have characters that happen after all the other text? Okay. And if you're seeing this, these are extra records that are not payroll records and that you do not want them on your file. So what you want to do, if you want to go snug up to the most to the closest actual text file and hit your left arrow, okay? And that will bring you to the last record. I know it looks like it's hanging in space over here, but that will bring you to the last record for the previous record, okay? Excuse me, the last character for the previous record. Now, if you're in Notepad, you'll look down the bottom and you'll see column 310, COL 310. That's when you know you're at the right end of an MPRS file. If you go to that column and you hold down the delete button, you should be able to clean out all of your extra records, okay? And now I just did it. Now it doesn't look like anything happened, but if I hit my down arrow, I can no longer go to those extra records at the end of the file. Now there are a few payroll vendors that have been kind of frustrating with this, honestly, but it allows for creating these extra records every single month. And there are a few folks that have to do this every single month. Now, as you can see, when you get used to doing it, it takes like 2 seconds. It's not the end of the world. But just in case you run into that, I just wanted to show you what that looked like. All right. So now we're going to go back into, oops, wrong session. You go to MyTRS. We're in our in private session here. And now here we are. We're going to go to import history. And let's do some importing. Okay. So again, these are where you can pick all your different selections, EFTs, deduction reports. We're going to upload a file in the top right-hand corner, okay? And we're going to browse. I'm going to go to that folder here, and I'm going to just pick an April file, all right, for demonstration purposes. Now, you can name your files anything you want, but I wouldn't get too creative because you might have to go find one of these files. Let's use some common sense here. We're going to call this April 2024. Okay, pretty simple. Hit next. Now, you can name your file anything you want. So here you have to actually tell it what month it's going to be. So April 2024. I'm going to choose next. Everything here looks good. Now, I did not mock up files with each of the different level 1 errors, but we already passed level 1. Okay, and again, you can see it's been successfully imported. So you get a lot of instant feedback from MyTRS. So now this is not processed and it's ready. So if we go into the ID for this import, so I'm going to click on this, and this is what it looks like when you're in the import screen, okay? So now in the top right-hand corner, you're going to see validate, void, process. We're going to go ahead and hit process. And now this has been queued for processing, okay? And it's honestly that simple. Now for a lot of folks, this is all they do. They go back to their import history, they wait a little while. You can see this is now queued processing request, and this is now not processed. And this will update to completed, and whether it's processed successfully or processed with errors, you know, like it'll let you know when it gets a new status. Now, one of the things you can do to cheat on this, because I'm not very good at waiting, particularly if I'm making chocolate chip cookies, but when I'm on deduction reports, it kind of drives me nuts. So what I'm going to do is hit F5 to refresh here and just see, no, still processing. Okay, we're going to give it a little more time. So while we're doing this, we have more files to load because, gosh, we're all the way back in April. Let's load some more stuff. So we're going to go back to upload file, and let's go grab us a May file. Now, I'd give a May clean file, but what fun would that be? So let's fail some imports here. So we have one that we mocked up with some, you know, pretty common errors. Pick that one. We're going to pick May 2024. Don't mind me, I'm compelled to fix that. Apparently not well. Okay, and we know we're adding in errors. I don't recommend that and when you're trying this at home. All right, and then May, oops, 2024. I'm going to choose next. Now, so far, even though it knows it's going to be some errors. Now, we don't have any level 1 errors, so that's going to go through level 1 perfectly fine. Again, successfully imported. Now, what you'll see, though, is that refresh the screen and our April file processed successfully. So if you have all your stuff in payroll, that's how hard or how easy it is to import a deduction report. That is all set. Those files are ready to work on in the deduction report editor for next week. Fantastic. So now I'm going to go back to import history. So now we have the second one we want to process. I'm going to go in here. We're going to wait for this blue line to stop dancing. Very good. Now we're going to hit process. Now we're queued for processing. I'm just going to go ahead and wait on that. Now, I always like to come back out to import history. again, real life, if you're going through this, if you go to load your file, find something else to do. I'm sure almost everybody has other deduction reports they can work on. Maybe you have some folks that, put in some LOA paperwork and you're in MyTRS. If we go to another screen, it's going to tell us when that import is done. Now, when we're in the imports earlier in the screen refresh, it didn't do that because we were there, right? I mean, it's like it's right in front of you. I already told you. But I'm going to stick in here, and you can see here, process action is completed. So now we have process with errors, right? So it doesn't have good news for us. It's just letting us know some bad news on that screen if you go back there. Now, out of our 121 rows, 113 were processed. Okay. Now, I haven't talked about the filters or any of that kind of stuff. We're going to do that in a deduction report. We didn't really have anything to filter for yet. So one thing I will say, though, is when you come into your imports, you'll see that there's automatically a filter that's applied here. Basically, what this is set to do is that roughly 90 days worth of imports are going to show to you at any given point. Now, if we clear this filter, you can see every file that's been imported in this school district all the way back to 2010. I have no idea why you'd want to do that, but you may need to find a file from like a year ago. And so if you ever clear this out, you can always go back in and look at your imports to see maybe when something was imported. Maybe you are the business manager and your payroll officer is telling stories about how they always import their stuff on time, or you just want to go in and prove it for an auditor. Oh, no, we're always on time. We have our stuff in there by the 8th every month. And so you can go in and you can actually show an auditor from the screen, like, nope, it shows me the file load start date. So if you need to go past 90 days, you're gonna have to clear that filter, okay? It's a default. So I'm gonna click into this May one. We're gonna work on some broken stuff, okay? So when you're in here, again, we're gonna wait for that blue line to stop dancing. So now we have the May file with errors, right? And then we're processed with errors. We have our username. So it gives you a nice little convenient count, right? So if you're in hot water when you first get in here. We have 113 out of 121. That's fixable, right? We only have 8 people to fix. That shouldn't be too bad. Now, at the top, you have a couple of different options here. And of course, you can always reprocess when you're done, right? So at the top here, I'm going to pop out a PDF of what the errors are. Some people like this format better. I'm more of a CSV kind of guy, but so all this stuff's going to be pre-filled for you. You don't have to pick any of it. All you have to do is hit done, and you will get a PDF. Now, these are all of your different people that have an error, okay? So you can see Jessica Moontai has a couple things going on. She's got a bad position code. She reappears down here where she has a contract term, pay duration, and pay frequency are bad. Tanya Tavolo, she's got contract term, pay duration, pay frequency. June Tunes, she's also got some of that stuff. So this is pretty typical for what we see from time to time when people are going through their, level 2 errors, right? I mean, this is, hey, these folks probably just moved over to payroll, or maybe they switched over from being, from being an aide or something, and you just didn't get some of their fields into payroll, right? So 2 things. 1, make sure you fix this stuff in payroll. You don't want to fix this manually every month. Nobody wants any part of that. And then 2, you can go in and fix them in MyTRS, okay? So we're going to drag this error message. I'm going to drag this to a different screen, and we're going to work on some of these errors. Now, you won't be able to see them while I'm working on them, but you'll see the errors themselves. Now, the other thing I'm going to do here is just show you there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can have the same exact list in CSV. So that'll come up in an Excel option. And you can probably picture what that looks like, but why picture it if we can show you, right? So we'll save your imagination for when you're actually fixing the errors, right? So again, same thing, everything's kind of bunched together. You can see, you have to expand it out a little bit because it is a CSV file, so it's going to compress. And again, you can see all the same stuff, right? Now, some people, again, like the PDF version because they don't have to do any formatting, but if you have a lot of errors, sometimes CSV can be helpful because it allows you to organize them and stuff, okay? So I'm going to hit don't save. And now, again, if you're running into this error kind of stuff, it's because data is missing in your payroll system. Don't overlook that. Fix your payroll system and fix the report. Now, if that list was 65 people long, good Lord, figure out what's wrong in your payroll system, go fix it there, regenerate your file, and just void it, okay? Now, here we are. So we're in the deduction report itself. You can see all these people have a status of process successfully, but we want to get to the people who have an error. Now, here we're in read-only mode, okay? So we want to go to edit before we try to fix anything, all right? So first, we're going to go to edit, and this will allow us to go in and make some changes. And you're going to see it'll take a minute, but a pop-up will appear. Now you can work on a deduction report once it's done. Now, again, here we have some different options. We have some of the functions that are available in deduction reports with showing columns and stuff. Really, imports never get that crazy. If you're hitting these buttons, you're trying too hard. Really, it should be much faster than this. First, you can filter. So if you want to filter to all the people who have processed with errors, all the people who have validated with errors, all the successful people for some reason, but you'll notice that the successful people, these people are fine. We're not going to let you break something that was perfectly okay, right? If you really want to change something on them, once you get to the initial status, we're going to let you do that. But we're not going to let you break something and make something worse, right? So right now, these people are set at read only because they are good to go. All right. So what you need to do is get to the folks who have an error. So again, you can go to filters and we're going to choose process with errors, right? Now, when you're doing this, it's much faster because you don't have to explain to yourself how to do this. But so we're going to go in, and this is everybody with process with errors. And as you can see, these folks, because they're processed with errors, we can make changes to them, right? Now, one other thing I like to do, I think the filter's slow in comparison to be able to just sort them. So I'm going to close the filter for a second. We're still in edit mode, right? When I go into a deduction report and I want to see who has errors, if you click on detailed status twice, you get all your process with error people who just appear right at the top. It's nice. It's a habit. You don't have to go figure out, the filters. You don't have to pick the right field, any of that kind of stuff. You just simply click on detail status twice and everybody with an error will appear here, okay? So Jessica Moontai, she's our first victim here. Now, depending on your browser, sometimes the sort of sliding menu thing here can be a little annoying depending on the size. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And that will make this appear a little quicker for us. Okay, so for Jessica Moontai, she has a bad position code. She also has a bad contract term, pay duration, and pay frequency. Now, this always means her MPRS screen or MPRS tab or her retirement screen, whatever your payroll software calls it, was not completed correctly, right? Now, Jessica's got an error here. And it looks like her contract term and some of that stuff is applied. But what you'll see is the reason Jessica appeared on the report twice is two different records have two different problems. So in her bottom record, her top record has 10 and 12, has contract term and pay duration. Her bottom record had 0 and 0. So we're going to go in and fill in, she's a 10-month employee and she's a 12-month duration. And we know that because frankly, in her case, we get to cheat. She's right there. So we know what her values were, right? Now, normally, obviously, you'd be pulling this information out of your payroll system, right? And you want to make a note so that you fix her and she doesn't reappear on the error report again. Now, we're going to go over to pay frequency. Pay frequency is between the earnings and the deductions. So looks like everybody in this district's at 26, but you should know what your pay frequency is for your employees. Always look it up in payroll. Now, I can see that there are actually 4 members in a row that are missing their 26. I'm going to go ahead and fix them all because why would I just do it at a time? All right. And as you can see, depending on the errors you're getting, this is pretty basic stuff. It's information that's missing. So we have to, I don't think we had anyone with a bad FTE percentage. Let's go over to the position codes. Okay, so we have some folks with bad position codes. So Jessica's a speech therapist. Now there are 4-digit up to 6 digits or characters for different position codes. There's a list of the position codes in our file layout as one of the places. We also have them available on the employer site. So a speech therapist, their position should be the word speech. And that's why Jessica was getting an error on this particular record. Now, the teacher below, I'm guessing in their payroll system, they spelled out the whole word teacher, but our code is a 5-digit code called teach. And so that's why this person's getting an error message. I can tell you just by looking at it that the person below is also coming through teach. Now for the salary, this next record, as you can see, so we're working on this column, but this just really sticks out. This person's missing their annual salary. I don't know what it is. So if I look over and it's Francois French. So Francois is missing their salary. Now, obviously, when you're fixing it, you want to make sure you're putting in their salary from their payroll system, right? So you want to go in, you want to look them up and say, okay, what should be Francois's full year full-time salary? Now, for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put in a 0. Because even though I don't know exactly what Francois's salary is, I do know that a 0 is a number and it's going to allow him to go forward. And then when I get to the next level, I'm going to get another error message from Francois saying salary's not, a salary of 0 is not valid. Okay. But it's going to get me to the next level for this demo. So when I'm looking at the different position codes here, again, SPED is not an eligible MPRS position code, right? So I know this was one of the problems we had, so I'm going to go ahead and make them teach. They're a special ed teacher, okay? So they should have teach as their code. So these are some real basic stuff, and you can tell just by looking at them that these were really simple changes to make. I'm going to scroll back over because I know there are some other people with bad contract terms and pay durations. It's the beauty of when you broke the file on purpose. So Chris Calculus, June Tunes, Tanya, and Jessica are all teachers, right? So their contract term should be 10, and we can see it's the contract term up here. Their pay duration going to be 12. So they're getting paid 26 pays over 12 months. So they're a 10-month employee, so that's their contract term. Now I'm going to intentionally forget to fix Tanya. Sorry, Tanya. All right, so now we're going to hit save. Take a second to save. We're in real time here. Okay, very good. And now we're going to hit process. Okay. Now, in theory, we think we fixed everything, right? But we're human. Sometimes we forget. So I want to show you what that looks like. We're going to go back out to the import history screen. It's going to reprocess, and you can see again, instead of saying process with errors on both sides, now we're back to queued processing request. Okay, so it's going to take a moment for this to rerun. And you're going to see, yes.
Is it good time for a quick question?
Perfect.
And it actually goes back a little bit. How do you add a cell phone number for the two-factor authentication?
Reach out to your assigned employer services representative and they will add it for you.
Great. And one more just came in. I have teachers who are receiving pay for extra days worked per contract. This is happening in June and July, and I receive an error when importing. I don't want to change the contract. Where do I correct this information?
You should be getting an error importing them. So the question is, when you're getting an error importing them, what error are you getting? Because the mere fact that they're working extra days shouldn't somehow trigger an error. Not on the importing stage. We'll revisit that in just 1 second. So here again, we can see this refreshed. And we're looking at May with errors, and you can see the number refreshed. Now 121, now 120 rows processed. There are 121 total. So we're going to go back in our file and see what we missed, right? Now we all know, of course, that it was Tanya, but we're going to pretend we don't know that yet. So we're going back in the deduction report. This is the import stage still. We're going to hit edit. Wait for our blue line to stop dancing. Very good. Hit detail status again. Poof, Tanya's at the top. Oh, geez, we forgot Tanya. Okay, so we're going to go to contract term and hit 10. Scroll down a little bit here, move it over. Very good. Now her pay duration we know is a 12 in this particular case. Now, please don't guess. When you're fixing your files, you're working on real data. You're not working on a test scenario. Make sure you're going through. Now, Tanya also had a bad pay frequency at one point, but it looks like we did fix Tanya's pay frequency. So we fixed her pay frequency before, but we did not fix her contract term and pay duration. So that's why she came back up as an error through her second run. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. I'm going to go back out. We'll hit process, and this file should be good to go. And that really is the essence of importing a file. It's really about just make sure you're doing it on deadline. Make sure, the real key to succeeding here and to doing the least amount of the stuff that you have to is about maintaining your payroll software. Like if you're putting in your brand new employees, make sure that when folks are being onboarded, that maybe it's not the payroll office, maybe it's the HR office. If they're the people doing the hiring and they have all the info and they're the ones who control the retirement screen, or sometimes it's called the MTRS screen. If that's the case, the key to success here is having a good sound process where they know to put in the right data, okay? And as long as that data is in your payroll system, you create your text files, you'll probably skate right by this process. It really should be about as easy as when we loaded that April file. You go in, you load it, you hit process, you sip coffee, you move on. And that's all I have on this for now. Are there anything else in the chat? I know there was the one person we're waiting to hear back on why they're getting an error message.
No additional questions.
Cool. All right. So we're gonna leave deduction reporting. We'll go back into our PowerPoint presentation. Okay. So this just leads me to one last point to make before we go, which is when you have your files, so you import them. Now, let's say they process successfully. That means the file is going to go to initial status, okay? And when a file goes to initial status, that's going to queue us up for next week's training program, which is the last of the trainings we're doing in the summer, and that's when your reports are in the deduction reporting module, okay? The technical name for that's the deduction report editor, okay? Because that's where you go in and edit your deduction reports. Probably pretty straightforward. So there are 3 statuses for files in there. So initial means you own it. You're working on it. You have not yet submitted it to us. Did you load it to our system? Yes. Have you submitted it to us? No. This is where you're going to work on the file. This is everything we're going to talk about next week, but it's going to be, adding comments to it, making sure it adds up, making corrections, assigning codes as needed. You own it, okay, when it's an initial. Then it's pending. So you submit it, as long as it's all clean, it's going to be pending our approval. This is where the ESU kicks in and we start doing our thing, right? So we're looking at files, we're asking questions, we're making sure everything seems to add up to profiles, the coding is consistent, coding makes sense to us, we have comments for everything we need, and of course that the report and the payment matches, all that sort of stuff, all right? And then last but not least, this is the happy land, right? Released. This means we have released those funds into your members' accounts forever. So again, released reports, I know we talked about this in CRED service before, which is quite simply released reports are going to be the key to your members seeing their creditable service. Those deductions have been released into their accounts, hence the name. So that's the name of the game. We want to get all our reports released. We want to help everybody get through this process. And so that's what those 3 different statuses mean. One thing I will say, and we're going to talk about this a little bit next week, if you're in deduction reports and you only see initial files, remember that it's a default filter. So you can always look back at your pending and your release files to see what's in MyTRS. One status that we kind of don't mention is if you submit a file to us and it's initial and we're looking at it and we're holding our nose because we're like, oh my God, this thing stinks. It's missing, we have missing people on it. We have errors all over the place. Nothing's explained. We can push it back to initial, and we will. We will reject that file back to you and say, I'm sorry, this file's not ready. And so it'll go back to initial. You'll see that there's a rejected date on it, so that we do track that. And basically, we're asking for the employer to reevaluate it, resubmit it, because, and we don't take it lightly. We don't just send back stuff. If we can, we'll work with you, and every time we send it back, we have to start from scratch too, right? So there's no incentive on our part to do that. But if it looks bad enough, we're going to say, look, you didn't do what you're supposed to do. Go grab a checklist because you didn't check off all the boxes. Okay. So it's not really a different status, but it is a situation where something might go backwards from pending to initial. All right. So with that, I just want to say, as we've been saying this whole time, you're a key partner in what we do. Our whole existence is about providing benefits to your employees that they've earned. So we're a free benefit from the Commonwealth. What we need from you is your hard work to help us get this done. So help us do what we need to do, making sure you understand how it works, who's eligible, all the different components, and we'll be successful together. Okay. Our end goal is your end goal, which is we just want employees to earn the benefit that they've earned in the system. All right. And don't forget, the superintendent is in our system. All right. So with that, if anybody has any questions, please know you can contact Employer Services. We have our main listed Employer Services contact page here. If you're not sure, of course, go through your assigned Employer Services rep. They're the person who's on your team. If you don't know who your Employer Services rep is, or for some reason they're on vacation or something, you can always email also empsup@trb.state.ma.us. Again, that's short for employer support. We don't even make you spell out the whole word. It's empsup. And then it's our regular tail, okay? So at trb.state.ma.us. So with that, I open the floor for any questions, and by gosh, we may have been finished one in an hour. Let's see.
Oh, wait. Error important. Thank you.
Don't think we have any more questions in the chat. Some people are just putting some comments in there, thanking us. I don't think there are any additional questions coming in. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you all have a great Wednesday. Our last show is going to be next Tuesday, our last session. So look forward to that. If you have any questions beyond this point, of course, you can always ask us or ask your employer services rep. And other than that, happy Wednesday, everybody.